Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. A little later in the program, we're going to be talking voucher program going to the Supreme Court. That's going to be pretty cool stuff. But first, I know this isn't fun. Sometimes you have to eat your vegetables. The state is in a wreck financially because of a retirement program called PERA. To talk to us about it, Joshua Sharf, who's been heading up a project at the Independence Institute on it. Glad to have you here.
Glad to be here, John. Glad to be the server of vegetables.
Yeah, thank you. So let's just try to make this as...
And retirement is fun.
Retirement's not fun.
Retirement's supposed to be fun.
No. My retirement's not going to be fun. I'm going to be 80 years old before I can retire.
Right, because you're going to be paying for all of this.
Right. All right. What is all this?
All of this is PERA. It's the Public Employees Retirement Association.
All right, for people who don't get this, let me see if I can do the outside. We have great workers who work for state government and other governments, and they put money into a pension fund, right. Not a 401k that they can take, but a pension fund that gets matched by we the taxpayers, and they have some really lavish benefits when retirement comes, according to this plan.
They have some very nice benefits. They have what used to be called a defined benefit plan, what still is called a defined benefit plan. It's a lot like what workers, in the auto industry back in the 50s and 60s were able to rely on. A lot of workers were able to rely on these defined benefit plans. You retire at a certain age. In this case, PERA employees get to retire at 58, although that number is being bumped up for some employees 58? Up to 60. Hey, they work hard.
58?
58.
Wait a second. I don't get Social Security until I'm 65.
Right, and we're going to get back to that because it turns out that's very important. And then they're able to retire, and then they get, based on their 3 highest years' salary, they get a formula based on that. That's what a fixed amount each year, and they can depend on that. That goes up by either inflation or, at this point, 2% a year, whichever is higher of the. I'm sorry, whichever is lower of those. And then they can, so it maxes out at 2% a year, and they are able to rely on that amount of money in an annuity, essentially until they die.
So this is not a defined contribution plan. Most employees now have a 401k. They put money on it, maybe their employer adds money to it, and it's theirs. They can take it with them, and they decide when they want to start pulling money out after a certain age. It's theirs. This is a pension plan. Other pension plans in the private sector have had problems. I think of United as the perfect example for me. Right. United Airlines had a lavish pension plan that they couldn't afford.
Right.
It was out of kilter, and that caused them to go bankrupt. And now friends of mine who are pilots who are retired got cut in half in their retirement benefits and then cut again after that because United Airlines is a private entity. They couldn't get bailed out by the government. This is different, though. How bad is the situation?
Well, this is different in a couple of different ways. First of all, a company like United or any of the larger ones are backed up by something called the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. That's a federal corporation, and it backs up. That is to say, you and I back that up. Although the pension plans themselves pay a certain amount into that as well. If they go bust, if they need to default on that, then the retirees, like you said, do only get a small portion of what they were promised, and that's really hard on the retirees. In the case of a state plan, of course, the state doesn't have the option of a state being a sovereign entity, doesn't have the option of going bankrupt. All it can do is default on these payments, and that's why it's a little different situation. PERA admits to a $24 billion unfunded liability. That is, at this point, the employees who are working now have accrued benefits, that is, promises of $23 billion for which there are insufficient assets to cover that.
All right, to put that in things I can understand.
Yeah, so that's about...
This is bigger than the entire state budget.
Yeah, that's about 13,000, maybe a little bit less than that, $13,000 dollars per Colorado household, all right, in terms of an unfunded liability that's sitting out there. We think
How did they get into, I mean, I've seen this destroy city after city. Detroit's dealing with it right now. How did they get into this situation?
Well, one second.
Yeah.
We think it may actually be worse than that. We think it may be about twice as bad.
How so?
That it may be about $47 billion, that the way that they're accounting for the liability is incorrect. You really want to go to sleep, We can go into
No,
that.
I don't
You
want to
wanna
go
go
into
to sleep.
that. Go-
So
It's
how they
bad.
got into that is a combination of factors. Number one, the promises, especially in the beginning part of the decade of 2000-ish, of the last decade, got ahead of what the actual income to the program was. Number two, the managers at the time, they're not doing this anymore, but the managers at the time basically put bets on the stock market, which meant they were riding the tech bubble. And when it burst, the asset allocation was such that they had so much in stocks that they really got hit and got into a hole that they really have never been able to climb out of. And then the third was that one aspect of PERA is that employees are able to buy service credit. That is, they can, if benefits kick in at a certain number of years, they're able to purchase service credit. Now, this problem has largely been solved, but at the beginning of, say, 1999, 2000, 2001, there was a fire sale between the legislature and PERA managers. It was essentially a fire sale on service credit. And
For those people who don't follow that, basically, instead of me working 25 years, I could work 20 years and pay into it as if I had another 5 and build up as if I worked longer just by throwing more money into it. They had a huge deal. It was a good deal to be a state employee, and it's one of those issues that it's hard for people to get how much of the compensation for state employees comes from PERA.
for a couple of years, when they were buying this service credit, it was the single biggest source of income to PERA, bigger than the employee contributions, bigger than the employer contributions. Just astonishing. But of course, the cash was coming in, but at the cost of this promise that was being built up out in the future. In fact, the single, you brought up retirement age before. If you wanted to do something about this problem, if you wanted to solve this problem, one of the biggest steps that you could take would be to raise the retirement age to something that approximated what you and I retire at. And why is that? Because if you think of how these work, how does this work? You're putting money in, you're getting interest, it's going up.
Right.
Okay, now you cut that off at a certain point and you start drawing money out, right?
Right.
But if you add a few years onto the end of that, you're adding it to the steepest part of the curve. You're adding it to the time when you have the most assets, and so you're making the most money on those assets. All right. At the same time, I mean, let's be honest, people aren't necessarily going to live longer, so you're taking money, you're taking years away from the part where that curve is in the steepest decline, where you're taking more money out than you're putting money in. The simplest thing that you could do to solve this is to raise the retirement age for state employees.
And also, I think there's a basic fairness issue in that all the taxpayers who are on the hook for this very lavish retirement program for government employees, we don't have the opportunity to receive any of our benefits, at least from the government, until we're 65. And to be able to do it after 30 years of service or 58, whichever comes sooner. I might be wrong on that. But there's a equity issue here. And as retirement ages will have to get bumped up as our Social Security bubble starts breaking, and it's the same thing here, that's going to be one of those things that needs to be faced. We did a study years ago of University of Colorado, Denver staff members and how much more you would have to pay them in regular dollars up front to equal what they would get if they went out and bought a retirement plan that it's as lavish as what it turned out to be. You would have to pay somebody 28% more if they were going to go into the private market and buy a pension plan as lavish as what PERA is. So I just want to think about this. So when you hear someone who's working for the government that gets this public retirement association plan, if you wanted to pay them so that they would get it up front, you'd have to give them a 28% raise. That's how lavish this is if they wanted to go invest that into a 401k type plan and get the same returns.
Well, it's also not just a matter of fairness to the taxpayer, that's true. But if you look at what's happened in places like Stockton, if you look at, good Lord, look at Detroit. Now, we're not Detroit. We're not likely to become Detroit, but we're likely to become California. And if you look at what happens in some of those municipalities, people who are retired suddenly don't get checks that they're expecting. Right. People who are near retirement find that all of these plans that they've made aren't worth anything, and it's too late for them to make a change.
That's a great point, because when we talk about this, it just sounds like cranky taxpayers saying we don't want to pay for this, but when the system is broken this way and unsustainable, it's the people in that system who are going to get hurt. You don't want to be a retiree from Detroit right now. You don't want to be a retiree from Stockton right now. Right. And the same way you don't want to be a retiree who's relying on Social Security. Talk to me a little bit about pension spiking. What caught my ear was you base your retirement on your best, not your last, not your first, not your median, not your mean, but your best 3 years of employment, whatever you made the most amount of money on. My 401k doesn't do that at all. We don't say, well, you know, you made a lot of money that year, so we're going to pay you dividends as if you were putting in that much.
Well, remember, with a 401k, you own a piece of an asset. Okay? With a defined benefit plan, you own a piece of a promise. And the way that that promise, or liability, the way that that promise is calculated is, in this case, on the highest 3 years of salary. They don't have to be the 3 consecutive years, and they don't have to be the last 3 years. There have been a couple of bills defeated that would have extended that out to, say, average it over 7 years, average it over 5 years, but those have been defeated as part of reform efforts.
So in other words, in the last 3 years of your employment with the state, if you're getting hourly, you want to make sure you're working every holiday, every vacation day. You want to get that up as high as you can for the last 3 years, because then the rest of your retirement is going to be that much higher.
Yeah, there was, and part of what we're facing now. Now, this is something that has been reformed, but in the past, employees were able to, for instance, save vacation and take that as a lump sum, not take the vacation, right, and then take that as a payment. Then that payment was considered the vacation that they had worked and then gotten paid for was considered part of their salary, and so averaged in. It was really an unfair way of averaging in their salary.
We got about a minute here. So we've got this problem where we promised good workers that this benefit plan would grow at 8% a year, which was just insane. And over the last few years, nobody's investments have been doing that. They had a good year last year, and that's terrific. What solves this? Real quickly, if you could do a magic wand to solve this problem, to help make sure that these people are secure in retirement, what would it be?
2 things. Number 1, raise the retirement age. Number 2, cap the problem by converting this into a defined contribution plan. Promises that are already made, promises that have already been earned, I think you have to keep. But don't make the problem any worse by continuing to make promises that aren't going to be kept.
I mean, government workers should have the same retirement system the rest of us have, something they can own that's theirs. Joshua, thank you so much. I appreciate it. People want to get more information on it. Where do they go?
Well, they can go to Independence Institute, and the PERA project is on the page there. They can download the paper that we just published and find some more information there.
Spectacular. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this one.